All right, go ahead and get started. Good evening, everyone. I'm Brandon Wilkes, Education Coordinator here at the Haynes Public Library. Thank you for all being here. Very gratifying to see the kind of turnout for the very beginning of the Armchair Traveler series this year. Last year, Russ and Cindy Buxton put this together. It was fantastic. We had a really good time with it. A lot of good turnout. So I'm really happy to see it happening again this year. And we're kicking off with a great show by my friend Eric here, I guess co-worker, as he would call me, about his time from the Ferebee back to Lutak. And so I will turn it over. Oh, please turn off your cell phones or put them on silent. If you're on Zoom here, please keep yourself muted. Feel free to chat in your questions. He'll answer them at the end. But if you have any questions, please, you want to express verbally, please wait till the end. And if you know someone who wanted to be here or wanted to see this and couldn't be here, we will have recordings of this up on the library website and on YouTube. So feel free to let them know that they can tune in and check this out. We'll probably have it up by next week. With that, I will get out of the way, turn over to Russ White, and I hope you folks enjoy your evening.
Good evening, Cindy over there and I kind of got this Armchair Traveler series. I should just read what she said because I'm going to screw up if I don't. Thank you for joining us here this evening in person and via Zoom. Thanks to the library and Brandon especially for facilitating these talks on adventures and travels by Haynes locals. The series began during the second year of the pandemic when many of us were still not traveling widely, but has continued because there's some great stories from travels by locals. So pull up your armchair and enjoy traveling without leaving town. A few technical details, please keep your video camera off, just stop your video. It makes things flow smoother so that the video that Eric is showing will flow out to everybody without having to get video coming in from people that are watching. Zoom has been glitchy this week. I've been on a couple of Zoom calls for my own video. It was so jerky, and I think if you upgrade to the newest version of Zoom, you won't have that problem. But since you're just watching Eric, I'm sure he's already upgraded, so we should have no problems. If you have any questions during the talk, as Brandon said, type them into the chat, and we'll bring them up at the end. Next week, we'll have Brian Weed, who's almost a local. He's from Juneau, talking about his trip across Admiralty Island canoe ride via pack raft. After that, we have a week gap. So if you're interested in giving a talk February 1st, contact Cindy. Then after that, we'll have a talk by Carolyn Van Hemert, author of The Sun is a Compass. And I'm not sure if she's talking about that trip or about some other trip, but we'll get more details on that coming up. Then Deborah Marshall will be doing a talk on her trip on Camino del Santiago in Spain. And that'll be followed by a talk by Michael Belize on his trek around a mountain in Tibet. So lots of good talks coming up. Next, I'm supposed to introduce Eric. Eric has been exploring the wilderness around Haynes for about 13 years. He has paddled nearly all of our local rivers, traversed many of our glaciers, and snowboarded countless mountains and even some first descents. Along the way, he's built up an extensive photography portfolio, which he showcases at sherpa.photoshelter.com. He has been an on and off professional photographer for over 20 years. And he's also the technical guru here at the library, so we should have no glitches. Here's Eric Seaman.
Thank you, Russ. Okay, thanks everybody for coming. This will be fun, and it's basically a big photo slideshow, so I'm going to share my screen here.
Nice touch screen.
Yep, we have some great technology here at the library, and you guys should be seeing a slideshow, and I'm going to start it. Okay, you guys seeing the title slide there? Hopefully so.
Yes.
Okay, I'm gonna move this out of the way a little bit. Okay, let's see how this goes. So yeah, this is a river trip from the Ferebee Glacier to the ferry terminal at Lutak that we did in June of 2022. And here's a bunch of my photos. I've got a lot more photos at my website. in the bottom right there, if you guys are ever curious to go check that out. Real quick to start out, I just want to acknowledge that we're on traditional Tlingit territory. And, especially when I was talking about exploring, when I use the word explore, I just want to be clear that I mean it in a very personal sense. It's personal exploration. This is new territory for me as a person, but I don't mean to imply that people haven't been to this spot before. So I just wanted to start with that. A little bit of geological history of where we're talking about here. I found a neat little study online about the Ferebee Glacier, and it compares satellite imagery from 1986 and 2014, and it's showing how much the glacier here has receded. And the geologists doing the study, they put these little red and yellow arrows to mark a reference point for both images. So you can see in 1986, the glacier here coming down through the middle towards the right of the screen, it terminates and the river comes out. And you could just barely see there's a little bit of a lake just starting to form in 1986. And coincidentally, this is August 1986. I was born in February 1987. It's a couple of months after this. Here's how it looks like 28 years later.
Can you stand on the other side?
Yeah, I can do that.
Then we can hear you better and see better.
Sorry, I was
Oh,
blocking the
thank you.
screen. My bad. So yeah, in about 28 years, the glacier receded by, just about 3 kilometers, and it created this giant lake. So that receded at about a rate of 100 meters per year, which is pretty fast, even for our local standards, I think. But I thought it was kind of neat that me and this glacier lake have something in common. We're both the same age. There's a couple other really cool things with these satellite images. If we go back to the 1986 and look at the purple dots near the top, that's where they marked the snow line, the August snow line. And then if we go to 2014, you can see how far up the mountains that snow line has receded. And I think it's about 2,000 vertical feet. So a really big difference. There's a lot of permanent snowfields disappearing in Haines, and I've observed a lot of that. There's one more really neat thing about this satellite imagery. And unfortunately, the zoom bar seems to be covering it. Maybe I can make this thing go away. Ooh, I don't know if I can. But those of you who are on Zoom anyway, I think you'll be able to see right at the top of the screen, there's a new brown spot that appears in 2014 on top of the glacier. That's actually a giant landslide that came down in 2014 at the top of the Ferebee. And I wish you guys could see it here in person, but Zoom thing's blocking it, but just some interesting geology. Okay, so here's the trip from the Ferebee Glacier to the sea and then across Lutak Inlet to the ferry terminal here. It took us about 3 days. There were 3 of us in pack wraps, which are little bitty pack wraps, you'll see. 1 helicopter is how we got out there. It's a total distance of 21 miles the whole way. And only 300 vertical feet. This lake at the terminus of the glacier, it's only at 300 feet above sea level. So 21 miles of river and 300 feet of drop, that's really not much. It's a pretty mellow river trip. A lot of long, meandering, slow water. But we were aware of 2 possible sketchy areas that we might encounter. And that's really the only thing we knew about this trip. We don't really know what we're going to find, but we had heard from Drake, who's a local pilot. We heard that, he flies over there a lot, and he mentioned a rapid. He said, "Oh yeah, you guys are going to love this rapid." And usually when Drake says something like that, I get a little bit uneasy, like, oh, that might be kind of big water. So I don't know, we'll see how this goes. And the other thing that we were a little worried about, we had heard about a log jam. And I had talked to a number of people over the years who had tried to jet boat up the Ferebee River from the ocean, and they never made it very far. But I think there was one person who brought a chainsaw and cut through log after log after log. And eventually they reached this spot where there were so many logs, they could not go any further. It was just impossible, this big log jam. And so I'd always kind of wondered in my head, like, what does that look like? Like, how bad is this log jam actually going to be? So before the trip, we started pouring over satellite imagery. And, I would start on Google Earth and just start at the Payasonka Harbor, which is at the bottom of the river here, and just kind of go upstream looking at the satellite imagery. And if you keep going far enough, you're eventually going to find this logjam. This is the logjam, apparently. And, looking at it on the satellite, we're thinking, yeah, that's a pretty good logjam. Like, we're definitely not going to float through that. But it looks like it should be pretty easy to walk around. We probably don't want to walk around on the river right side because that's a longer way around. But if we take the river left through the woods, we'll probably be able to walk around that thing. So we thought, yeah, we'll scope it out with the helicopter and see how it looks. And then the rapid that Drake was talking about, here's the satellite view of the rapid, and it's kind of blurry. You can't really tell. You can't tell how bad it is. You see a lot of waves, but I mean, looking at this, I couldn't really tell if this was huge waves or just, minimal whitewater. So it was still a big question mark for us going into it. But otherwise, it looked really mellow and straightforward. So, like I said, we chartered a helicopter with Temsco, and actually the original plan was to fly with Drake, but that same weekend in early June, it got really hot, and the glacier we were going to land on is pretty low elevation. It got soupy and it got wet, and Drake said he's not comfortable landing with it in being in those conditions. So we scrambled at the last minute and we called Temsco, and they said, sure, we'll fly you out there. And it was about $1,200, and we split it 3 ways. But the pilot actually told us probably could have taken 5 of us, even with the gear and the pack wraps. So if anybody wants to do this in the future, that's pretty affordable, $1,200 and 5 people. So yeah, it was, first weekend of June, super hot weather. The Chilkat River this same weekend reached it hit the record flood stage. So it was pretty much the highest water levels you can get. And that was another question mark. I think that's going to be a good thing to have high water, but maybe that could be a bad thing too. So we started flying up the valley here. Here's a shot from Payasonka Harbor looking up the Ferebee River, and just a couple of shots going up the river and how spectacular the valley is. Flew over the logjam, and as soon as we got eyes on it, we were like, this is going to be awesome. This is no big deal. The water's so high, it looks like it's like slack water. It's almost like a lake. There's not a lot of current going through there, so it should be pretty easy to pull over to the side. It's bushy, but we'll find a way to walk around. We're used to that kind of thing. And yeah, my vote was definitely to walk around this river left side. That seemed like the shortest portage to get around that obstacle. But we also talked about trying to sneak up through the right. Maybe we can paddle over this log and then through here and sneak through here and, I don't know, pop out somewhere, but get into that more. So we go past the logjam, we're flying up the valley. There's these huge avalanche chutes on either side, mostly on the right side here. So those were really neat to see. And this one here, is it this one? Maybe it's the next shot. There we go, that one. So this avalanche chute was really neat to me. It looks to me like what happened was a giant avalanche had come down at some point in the past and taken out trees on both sides of the river and on the island in the middle, maybe too. I see kind of a lobe-shaped scar there. So there's just a lot of really neat stuff going on back there. Giant avalanches and beaches and the glacier and a lot of beautiful scenery. And I'd always wanted to see it. Been thinking about this trip for a long time. So I'm really glad I got the opportunity. So the other uncertainty was we had no idea where the helicopter was going to set us down. I figured there were beaches along the lake, so that maybe there'd be a beach big enough that we could set down on that. But when we got there, it turns out coming up from the lake is all sheer rock. There's not a single beach out there. So the only place to set down was this little island right below the end of the lake. And this shadow on the lower left is actually the shadow of a giant glacially errated boulder that was taller than the helicopter. And he was able to sneak in right between this section of water and this giant rock, and just barely enough room to set the helicopter down. So it was a pretty cool landing, and I'm always impressed at how they can do that. And they set you down and they take off, and you're out there alone in this incredible spot. There's me and Bart Pisiel and Max Graham.
Put the X on the transcript.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Okay. So, we get there, they set us down right at the end of the lake. And, it's really beautiful. All these icebergs from the glacier had blown down with a katabatic wind. They blew down to our end of the lake. And right where we were going to set up our tents, it's just this beautiful scene. And it was about 6 p.m. when we got in. So we thought, well, let's go for a paddle. It's middle of summer. We got hours of daylight. Let's see what happens. So we started inflating our pack rafts and getting all ready to go. And I don't think we really had a plan at this point. We just wanted to get on the water and kind of play around amongst the icebergs. And they're just so beautiful when you get up close to them. And there's so many different textures of ice. Like some of them have this coarse, like this one is very coarse and almost fractured everywhere. And if you touch it, you can break off these big chunks. But then there's other icebergs that are completely solid like glass. And, as hard as, they feel as hard as rock. So a lot of different variety out there, a lot of different shapes. Mushroom icebergs that are fun and slightly dangerous to paddle under. And just because we did this doesn't mean I recommend doing it.
Safety report.
Yeah. Don't tell Al Badgley. But that's part of the fun of being out there. And it was such a pleasant day. It was super warm, so I'm sure these things were not the most stable, but we were kind of on a roll. So we kept paddling out that evening and just decided to just keep going. And we ended up going all the way to the end to the glacier to check it out. It probably took us an hour to paddle each way to get all the way to the other end of the lake. And along the way, there were just like dozens of these incredible waterfalls along the sides. And, it was high water flow, so it kind of makes sense. But I think I counted like 30 or 40 waterfalls that come down those walls and into that lake. And I don't remember ever seeing a lake that was quite that spectacular, just with the sheer cliffs and the ice and these so many waterfalls just pumping so much water. It's really, really special. And the glacier itself, pretty mellow, it didn't have any large chunks that were, looked like they were actively about to fall off. We felt pretty comfortable approaching it, which I don't always feel comfortable with that. He was a good shot of Bart with his paddle. And, looking at the photo in hindsight, I noticed there's this nice rock perched up here right above Bart, like just a perfect line to fall right onto him if that rock were to slide off the ice there. And he's completely oblivious to that. But still pretty cool being up there. Another shot of Bart being totally oblivious to the rock perched above his head. And the waterfalls.
Is there any water coming up from underneath?
Yeah, I think so. We didn't see another outlet for a river coming out above the lake. So I think most of the water is coming out under the glacier and probably coming up into the lake from below. But we couldn't really sense that on the water. There wasn't like a strong current or anything. This panorama is kind of cool. It gives a little bit more of a sense of scale, just how big everything is. And all the sheer rock, all the sheer cliffs going straight up above the lake, pretty much all the way around. And of course, you know, if you've ever been out on a glacier, you know, the first thing you want to do is hike up to it and go check out the ice, and touch the ice and get under the ice and get on top of it. So we parked the pack rafts and kind of clambered up this rocky slope on the edge of the ice. And if you've ever been on a glacier, you probably know that every single one of these rocks is balanced on a little pinpoint, a little knife edge. They're all totally unstable. And if you just walk up and barely touch one, they'll just fall right over. So everything in this landscape is moving and dynamic and ready to crush you at a moment's notice. So you really have to be careful how you're walking and where you're walking. And if you were to just stand here and stare for an hour, you'd see countless rocks falling. You would see, you know, debris coming down the mountainsides. You'd see these little boulders that are up on the ice start to slide down. Things are just moving constantly. And it's always fascinated me. And it makes sense, you know, the rocks are on the ice and then the ice melts and they just end up in these precarious positions. But we were able to get pretty far up there to hike around. And there was one small ice cave. It wasn't huge, but it was very pretty and it was open on both ends, so we could crawl through and then, you know, come out the other side, which was really neat. And it's always nice wearing a dry suit for that stuff because there's always a lot of water dripping, especially on a hot day. Yeah, it's really humbling being up against the ice. They're huge, and you know, you try to capture photographs and you just can't. The sense of scale is totally lost here. I think this is about where we turned around. I think it started to get a little bit steep and rocky and loose and starting to get late in the evening too. There we go. Favorite photo of Bart to date, Bart and the big mountain. We talked a lot about this this couloir back in the background. Looks a little icy and gnarly, but we were joking around about skiing it someday. I'm sure some heli skiers been up and skied that line before. I think they go up there pretty often in the winter. Yeah, and these shots on the way back, you know, we got back in the boats and started paddling back towards camp. And I think these ones for me really kind of show the scale a lot better. It's just an incredible amount of ice and mass. It's kind of mind-blowing. Bart and Max looking at a waterfall, I think. Probably that one. There's something about the lines out there too. The way the water is cascading over these different levels of cliffs was really kind of unique to me, and I couldn't stop taking photos of it. Took an absolute ton of photos on this lake. And some of those waterfalls cascade directly into the lake, which is a little bit unique. So we were able to paddle up to this one and kind of play around with it. And then, you know, you're paddling back and you think you've seen all the most amazing scenery. And then the sun starts setting. It's probably like 10 or 10:30 p.m. or something like that. And it just got more and more beautiful. I think this is maybe my favorite photo from the whole trip. You know, in my opinion, I've been to a lot of really amazing spots, and I think this ranks up there with like all the national parks I've been to on the continent. You know, like Lake Louise is amazing. Glacier National Park's amazing, but this is really something special. And there's something about the sheerness of the cliffs and the number of waterfalls and the glacier and also the shape of the peaks too. It's just an incredible spot. I think it really ranks highly up there for me. Then we got back to camp, it was getting a little dark and Bart decided he's gonna climb up on this iceberg, which was awesome. Another favorite shot, I think, from this. There's something about this moment, I think like a little bank of fog had like formed right at the end of the lake or something, and it just got a little bit misty. And it added a little bit of extra mystique to the photo. We cooked some dinner and we kind of sat there with the icebergs. So yeah, there's not a lot of room for a camp there. There's really only one little flat hillside that we were able to pitch the tents on. And it's kind of cool being so close to these icebergs all night, because every like 4 hours or so, one of them would break in half and flip over and make this like kind of terrifying sound. It's actually kind of funny. Got us every time. Yeah, I had a really nice dinner in this spot and just kind of chatted about things. So the next day, we woke up and, you know, having flown over the river and scouted it out, we realized like it was going to be a pretty quick trip to paddle out, and there weren't really any obstacles that we were that worried about. So we decided we got plenty of time. Let's go for a big hike. And so we hiked up the side of the lake as far as we could. We got about 2,000 feet up the mountainside. And at this point, we kind of reached the snow line and snow started getting too deep to keep hiking any further. So we just ate lunch and turned right on. But it's good to get that perspective on the place. And it's really different up there on the Ferebee. You know, the mountains are quite a bit more sheer and vertical than a lot of the other mountains around Haines. So it feels like you're in a different area. It almost feels more like Himalayan in a sense. There's this really neat little moraine feature up in this basin up near the top right that is intriguing to me. I kind of want to peek back there sometime and see if there's a big glacier back there. Yeah, definitely want to go back. Lot to do. So you guys are going to be really disappointed because I know you're here to hear about the river trip down the Ferebee, but the reality is I took all my photos at the lake before we ever got on the river. And I was fully intending to keep taking photos as we paddled down the river from there. But for some reason in the moment, I basically decided to put the camera away and stop shooting photos. And just to enjoy the river as it was, and it's definitely worthy of taking photos. I just decided not to. But Bart had a GoPro camera on his helmet and he was taking video, and he's also getting out his phone and taking photos and videos. So I figured we'd have it covered. But unfortunately, Bart's in the Himalayas right now. He's trekking through Nepal. And he really wasn't able to send me anything for this presentation. So you might have to have another Armchair Traveler series with Bart. One, to see the photos from his trip to Nepal, but two, maybe to see a little bit of the river experience that you're not going to get here tonight from me. But I'll try to describe it a little bit anyway. River was super mellow, not a big deal. There were a couple of logs that most of the logs in the river we were able to paddle around because the water was so high. But there were a couple that we had to stop and get out and portage around. And then there's the log jam and the rapid, which I'll show you a little bit about. So starting with the rapid, the only 3 photos I took on the river were from below the rapid after we had portaged around it. So basically, it's pretty hard to tell from the photos, but the rocks and the waves are pretty big. They're not huge. We looked at this thing for probably 20 minutes and really scratched our heads and talked about different routes that we might be able to get through here without bouncing off of a ton of rocks. But in the end, we just decided we're just gonna hit a bunch of rocks trying to get through this rapid. I'm sure we could paddle it without a problem. But there's some areas you would definitely want to avoid. And this is at the highest water, that it ever gets. So I'm kind of surprised at how rocky this was. I think we talked about a route that started on the river left and then possibly come down to about here and then jog right as hard as you could to get around this giant rock and this big hole below the rock. That way might have gone through. You would have had to do it really well without hitting a bunch of rocks. And we talked about some kind of sneaker line on the river right side, but it was way too rocky. So yeah, I'd love to hear if anyone's ever paddled this. I'm sure it goes through in a small boat. I wouldn't try it in a big raft. It's just too rocky. I really wanted to paddle it, to be honest. It looked really fun. But in the moment, we were just like, let's just walk around. So we portaged around it on this river right side, and it took a good half hour of bushwhacking and carrying our boats through the brush and trying not to pop the boats on the sharp sticks. Always good to choose the safer option. So that was the rapid. And the log jam, I already kind of showed you what it looks like from above. And you might be wondering, how did we end up doing it? How do we get around it? Well, let's go back to, let's do this. So when we got to the log jam, we debated. One of us wanted to pull out on the right side and try to walk around the right, try to sneak through. For me, I was like, there's a bunch of current over there. Let's just pull out on this eddy on the left side. So we ended up doing that. And we were going to bushwhack through the woods around it, but it was really thick, like a prison bar, alder kind of situation. So we decided, instead of walking around it, we're going to walk over the top of the log jam. And there were enough logs that we were able to do that. And it really wasn't easy. It took us a good half hour maybe to walk all of our stuff over that log jam. But the one thing Bart was able to send me from Nepal was a video of me carrying my boat over the log jam. So that's the one piece of evidence I have from that. It's very So that's how we crossed the log jam. Yeah, I think you guys should be able to see that on Zoom. But yeah, I mean, you can see it's kind of a mess of logs. It's not easy to walk over it. It's very sharp and pokey, and you kind of have to have good balance. And our boats are super heavy with all of our overnight gear and stuff, but there were just enough little walkways to get through this whole thing. So yeah, I mean, I think that's pretty much all I have from you or have for you. Yeah. I'd be happy to talk to you guys more about, how it went and anything questions you have. I really encourage you to go check it out. Like I said, the helicopter, it really isn't that hard to charter, and it really wasn't that expensive if you can split the cost up. And I just think it's totally worth it. And I really wish I had more photos of the river park, but you'll just have to go and try it out yourselves. They did. All right, we got a couple of questions. How about Nate?
Can you go back to the satellite image?
Yeah.
Show us where all these days were and where you spent the night.
Yeah. I hid the. I might have to stop the share here for a second. If you guys on Zoom will bear with me, I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to do it again once I get PowerPoint back how I want it. I think I need to view. There we go. Screen. Okay, so satellite photo, so here's kind of the map of where we were. Um. And. Well, yeah, we'll just have to view it like this. So I put these little red stars. I don't know if you can see those back there, but our camp at the base of the lake here. And then we had a second camp at the harbor. And I guess this is something that I didn't talk about yet because I don't have photos of it, right? We spent one night at the lake, and then we hiked up the mountainside for about half a day. And then we launched our boats from camp at probably 1 or 2 p.m. to start the float down the river. And we were thinking, we could, if we really wanted to, we could probably go the whole way out in one go and get back to the ferry terminal before 10 p.m. or something like that. But what was happening that day was there was like a small craft advisory on the fjord, and the winds were blowing south at 30 knots or something like that. And I was like, there's no way I want to paddle across Lutak Inlet in those conditions. So, in my mind, it was always clear we were going to camp at the harbor when we got there. And that's what we ended up doing. We floated down. It took us about 6 hours, I believe, to float the entire river, including walking around the rapid and walking over the log jam. And just the rest of the lazy river the whole way out. And when we got right to the top of the harbor here, we camped right on the beach there, so we have access to the fresh water of the river. Spent a night there with the bears.
What's the average width of the river? Did it vary in width, or was it pretty narrow in places? Or?
It was really consistent the whole way. If you've been up there in a jet boat, you've probably seen what it's like when it hits the harbor here. It's pretty much the same. I feel like it's pretty much the same almost the whole way up. It's this lazy meandering, like almost like an ancient river.
So
Is how
it
it
doesn't
feels.
swell and
It didn't really do
pretty tall
anything. Yeah, there's nothing too crazy except for the log jam. And that's another interesting thing that I forgot to mention is while you're floating down and it's lazy, you're kind of thinking your mind is kind of going in all these different places. And one of the things I was wondering is, well, where did that log jam come from? Like, what's the deal with that? And obviously it's a shallow point where logs can pile up. But I noticed pretty quickly that, you can see how squiggly the line is. There's all these serpentine curves. And on every one of those curves, there's a cut bank that's eroding. And it's basically a bluff of sand and gravel that's like 20 or 30 feet high. That's just collapsing constantly into the river. And as those river curves move over time, they take chunks of land, and it's all forest on top of that. And so there were many places coming down where you'd see like 10 trees all leaning at once, about to be sucked into the river. And you can see how over time, it's like this process of the forest growing up on top of the sand, and then the river moves a little bit and takes a whole chunk of sand, and it just takes the forest with it. And I'm guessing that something like that caused that log jam, because there are hundreds of logs all in one spot. And in general, there's a lot of wood in that river. So I'm sure that process will continue for a very long time. Yeah, does that answer your question?
Sure.
Yeah.
I guess as a follow-up, what do you think about if the water was low? I mean, do you think it would be a lot more challenging?
Well,
Hard to tell, I guess.
the paddling would be easier because it'd be slower. But there's more logs to go around if there were lower water. So there were 2 or 3 logs that we had to portage around besides the log jam that were just blocking the whole river. We couldn't paddle through. But there were probably 10 more that were crossing the river. And we could only sneak around them because the water was really high. Like we could just barely sneak around those logs. And if the water had been just a little bit lower, we would have had to get out and walk around those. So especially if you're in a larger boat, like a 16-foot raft or 20-foot raft or something, that would have been a real pain. Yep.
Yeah, how far do you think it would be to hike?
I've probably hiked like 3 or 4 miles up from the harbor, so somewhere up in here. And I thought the hiking was really easy. There's, like mature, dense evergreen trees that underneath there's no underbrush, and there's like ancient bear trails going through the moss. It's really cool under there. You can just go forever. And I've only gone a couple of miles, but I think that continues for a long way.
What kind of camera?
I use a Nikon D750, which is a full frame. Yeah,
How much bear sign and goat viewing did you?
you know, we didn't see any goats, which is kind of surprising. I'm sure they're up there. We didn't have binoculars, but bear sign, you know, at our camp, there were a couple of old bear tracks, but they didn't look fresh at all. So we weren't too worried about that. The one up at the lake. There was a ton of bear activity down at the harbor where the fish are probably. So yeah, it's always a little bit spooky sleeping in that harbor. There's a lot of bears. I've heard a lot of spooky stories as well about non-bear paranormal things happening there. Yeah.
Did you have in reach or did you have other communication if bad things turn bad?
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay.
We, I think we had at least 2 in reaches. We might have had 3. Which is really important. Yeah, I always carry mine on my person. So I keep mine in a little Ziploc baggie because they're not really waterproof and I put it inside my PFD. So that way, at least if I get separated from my boat, I've got my image. Yeah.
You use an electric fence.
No, we didn't bring an electric fence, but we definitely had bear spray.
That's a question on chat.
Yeah, there's probably some chat questions. We get.
So what do you think a raft? Would that be, it's almost impossible if someone got a raft dropped off at the top?
A big raft?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not a raft guide. I'm not gonna say it's impossible, but that rapid looked really shitty for a big raft. In my opinion, you would just be pinballing off of everything trying to get a bigger.
Plus the log jam probably wouldn't be easy to go around.
Log jam would be a huge problem. Yeah, yeah. But pack rafts are a really good way to go. You can get through a lot with those, and if you have to portage, you can always just carry them around.
But what do you think your total weight per person? I mean, count your pack raft and
You know, I
when you were
feel
carrying
like,
stuff around.
I feel like we probably only had maybe 50 or 60 pounds a person at most. The pack rafts weigh like with PFD and repair kit and paddle and skirt. I think the pack rafts add up to like 12 or 13 pounds or something. So the rest of it's just kind of your standard overnight camping gear and food.
Did you need a skirt?
No, not really. No, I think I used it for half the river, but it ended up being so mellow that we didn't really need it. I mean, super pleasant paddling, really. And if you're more adventurous, you want to try that rapid, you'd probably want to skirt for that. But
Where's the tide when you have to paddle a lot of
oh,
flat water?
I forgot to tell you guys about the best part of the whole trip. So we get to Tayasaka Harbor and we spend the night, and you know, some of the group wanted to just keep going that night, and I really didn't because I didn't want to mess with the high seas on the bay. So we spent the night and we realized we had a little tide book with us. We checked the tide. We realized, oh, it's going to be really, really inconvenient timing. So basically, the tide was high. For those of you who don't know Tayasaka Harbor, in order to get out of there, you pretty much need a high tide because it's a couple miles of really shallow mud flats that are just a pain to get through in low water. It's super shallow. It's like that shallow on low tide. So, yeah, we needed high tide, and we realized that high tide was going to be at, I think it was at 5 a.m. the next morning. So we're like, well, I guess we'll go to bed and we'll get up at 4 a.m. and paddle out.
So we ended up doing that. It ended up being just incredible. It was so spectacularly beautiful at 4 a.m. There was these tendrils of fog everywhere, and the wind had totally died down. It's completely calm, foggy. We got out to the end of the harbor where we go into Lutak Inlet, and there was just completely calm seas. It's just like a mirror out there. And we start paddling across towards the ferry terminal, and whales start doing their blowing into the air and showing their tails. I think we saw maybe like 3 or 4 whales that were just kind of hanging out there with us. The seals were kind of swimming alongside us, or sea lions, and it was so quiet and so calm. It was just beautiful. And that's the part I really wish I had some photos and videos from. And Bart has those, so ask Bart to see that. And the sunrise, of course, the sun was rising at that same time. It's really cool.
You know, I was curious if it was cold when you were sleeping by the icebergs.
Yeah, so I mean, it was a super hot summer weekend, and everywhere except for by the lake was like plenty hot. But yeah, you're right. Right there at the glacier lake, there's a cold wind that comes down that ice, and it blows right on your camp, and it's a little bit chilly. Yeah.
From your camp at the lake, it looked like you could, something you have with your boats, you could hide down.
Oof.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we would have just called him helicopter probably. I mean, yeah, you could have hiked down there. Well, you could have hiked to Titusonga Harbor, and then you need a boat to pick you up. But yeah, it's a long hike. You know, I know people who've skied it in the winter. They've skied that whole river, and I've heard it's more difficult than you probably want to do if you knew how difficult it was. It's kind of a sufferfest. But not to say it's not worth doing. I mean, I know there are people who have hiked from Haines to Skagway and gone through a large section of the Ferebee in the summer that way. But I'm not sure how much of it. Yeah. That's, you know, I've done a ski trip from Haines Pass to White Pass, and kind of going over the glaciers higher up. And that's a pretty doable route. And, you know, the people I've talked to who have done Haines to Skagway overland, it sounds a little bit, yeah, it's a little bit of a sufferfest, but a good adventure.
Tell me about the mosquitoes.
Bugs, you know, on the glacier lake, because of that katabatic wind, it kind of kept the bugs down. And you know, paddling along the river, we had enough speed to keep the bugs away. But as soon as we got to Titusonga Harbor, they're bad there, especially because it was calm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Any questions from online?
Anybody out there in Zoom land have a question? Well, yeah, thanks for coming.
Yeah.
And happy adventuring.
And next week we'll have Brian Lee talking about a trip across Admiralty Island with pack raft. There's a bunch of lakes across Admiralty, and there's a route that you could take. People have done it with canoes, but now the thing is pack rafts, so it'd be interesting to see that next week.
That'll be at 7 p.m. on Zoom only, so not on here. 7 p.m. The link will be available on the library website, private calendar. Just click on it, follow it, and it should be a lot of fun. And if you ever have any programs you ever do involving the library, involving the super awesome giant screen that Eric installed, just give us a call. We're here to facilitate. You ever want to share a skill you have in the community, let us know. That's what we're here for. All right, thank you. Thank you all for being here. Hope you have a great night. Get home safe.
Thank you, Eric. That was great. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cindy.